The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look, in rising to speak on this motion moved by the member, I think there's a few things that are worth highlighting. The first is, really since the election we've seen a lot of rhetoric from the government and very little action. And no doubt Australians will make judgments about the government in due course, and I think everyone will reasonably give a government time to implement some of the things that they've spoken about, or indeed to address some of the issues that they've critiqued in opposition. I think that the issue that many participants are having, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the moment is the very significant change in rhetoric from the Minister for the NDIS before the election to what the Minister is saying now. Before the election, regrettably, in my view, the then Shadow Minister, now Minister, really sought to turn the NDIS into a partisan political issue, in a way I hadn't seen any other parliamentarian do. Obviously, the Coalition and Labor government of the day, back in 2013, in a bipartisan fashion, established the NDIS. And it was really quite a coarse and toxic political environment that the now Minister brought to this debate by really turning it into a hyper-partisan issue. In that time, he simultaneously accused the Coalition of cutting the NDIS, to spending too much on the NDIS. So the consistency certainly wasn't his strong suit in these arguments. But probably most significant for the participants in the NDIS, Minister Shorten said before the election, when he was Shadow Minister, there are no sustainability issues with the NDIS. There are none. And in essence, he ran around the building saying, anyone that talks about sustainability of funding for the NDIS and its cost curve is somehow trying to undermine the scheme. He said, when he was asked whether he thought the scheme was sustainable before the election, he said, and I quote, "I don't buy that there's some catastrophic disaster happening to the NDIS." Earlier in the year, he also said, "You can't move around the corridors of Parliament in Canberra without tripping over a Coalition Minister whispering the scheme is unsustainable. I'm here to tell you today that is a lie." So the Minister before the election, when he was trying to run a hyper-partisan and really regretful campaign that politicised the NDIS, he was saying it's completely sustainable and anybody that says it's not is trying to undermine it. Fast forward to the Labor government and their most recent budget, we now see the rhetoric drastically change, where the Minister is now saying that, that there are sustainability issues with the cost of the NDIS, and that it's something that will need to form part of the government's thinking and indeed their review. So why is that such a significant breach of faith? In my view, the Minister went to election knowing he was sending a very strong message to those 500,000 NDIS participants and their families that he could, in some magical way, address all of the problems, wave his magic wand to address all the problems in the NDIS. And I suspect lots of people supported the government based on those promises. Now we see a completely different view. So the question, I think, for the government has to be, do they believe it's sustainable or not? And if it's sustainable, as they said before the election, well, let's see how they plan to fund the expected growth in the scheme in a way that doesn't drastically change it. Or if they now are trying to use the review as some way to break that promise before the election, the Minister should have the decency to fess up now, because I can tell you there are many NDIS participants and their families very nervous because the rhetoric has changed so drastically from before to after the election. The other thing I'd say, Madam Deputy Speaker, is, and it's ironic coming from me as a Shadow Minister, but the Minister still does sound like a Shadow Minister. He's running around critiquing all of the problems with the NDIS, commissioning a review, a significant review in one case, without actually offering any solutions. Nothing's changed. The queues and the time that it takes to get into SDA accommodation, for example, has not changed. The Minister's happy to talk about it, to the nth degree, but he has been the minister for 6 months. Hurry up, make sure the action meets the rhetoric.
I thank